Hello and welcome. This is the sewing instructions video for the Tetiana K Patterns Peplum cardigan. We'll start off by ironing our fusible interfacing onto the placket pieces. The fusible interfacing will end just a bit past the notch where the buttons end. Here's a photo to show where the interfacing pieces go. Next, we're going to join the two placket pieces at the center back neck seam. We will also finish the placket corner hems, and this is done by folding the placket on itself and stitching a little seam where the hemline is, and then turning that corner out. Then we will press open the center back neck seam on the placket, and we'll also, after turning the corners on the hems of the placket, we're going to fold the placket all along the length of the placket and just iron it to keep it folded. Once your placket is ironed all along the length, we're going to put a stay stitch to keep that placket folded and in place and just easier to work with. We're going to put that stay stitch at 1/4 of an inch on the seam allowance, so just sewing both the layers of the placket together. This is what the placket looks like after it's been pressed and with the stay stitch in it and ready for the next steps. Now we're going to finish all the raw edges of all the pieces by serging them. This is optional. If you don't have a serger, you can just skip this step. If you are serging, the only parts we're going to leave unserged is the little V's that make up the corners of the hems. But everything else, all the other raw edges get serged. Now we're going to move on to putting together the body of the cardigan, starting with the two center back panels. We're going to sew them together right side to right side, and we're going to sew the center back seam all the way down from the neck down to the hem. Next, we're going to sew the side back panels to our center back panels. So you'll see throughout the video I won't be using pins. I highly recommend that if this is your first time sewing this cardigan, that you definitely use pins, especially for these seams that I'm working on now, because there is some ease in the curve. Like you're sewing two different curves together, so they're slightly different, and one is slightly bigger than the other, so you have to kind of ease the fabric into it, and pinning your seam all along is very helpful. For myself, I've sewn this cardigan many times, and using this exact fabric, so I no longer need them and can do it without. But for yourself, please use pins to do these seams especially. Once our back is done, we can add the side front panels and sew the side seams. So we're sewing the side front panels to the side back panels, which makes our side seams. the last of the panels on the body you're sewing is the front panels to the side front panels. And again, you're sewing two curves together, and you will need to ease a little bit, so I highly recommend pinning this seam before sewing it. And here's what it looks like when all the panels of our cardigan body are attached. Next, we'll go back to our iron and press open all those seams we just did on the body. We will also at this time press up the hems of both sleeves using the notches on the hem of the sleeve as a guide. Now we will sew together the shoulder seams, connecting the front and the back. We will also sew the underarm seams of our sleeve, so folding the sleeve on itself and sewing that sleeve seam all the way down to the hem. At this time, we can also flip the hem that we pre-pressed on our sleeve and just top stitch that hem down using 3/4 inch on my machine as a guide, and just top stitching all the way around. Now we can press our shoulder seams as well as those sleeves that we just did, including the hems of the sleeves. In the next step, we're going to be attaching the placket to our body, and this placket is all in one piece now, and it'll go all the way from the hem on one side of the cardigan all the way up to the shoulder seam around the neck, to the other shoulder seam, and to the other side of the front panel. We start by placing the placket, lining up the hem of the placket with the hem notch on the front body, and then you'll sew all along that seam, lining up the notches. There's a notch where the buttons end, there's a notch for the shoulder seam, the center back neck, and again on the other side, shoulder seam, button down to the hem on the other side of the cardigan. Now we will turn up the hem on the front of the cardigan where the placket is, and we do this by folding the hem allowance over the placket to create a corner there, and you want to make it really nice and snug. Pull that hem allowance really snugly over the placket, so when you turn the corner it's very nice and smooth. It's a nice and smooth finish for you. So this is what the corners look like. The one on the left has already been sewn and turned, and the one on the right has just been sewn before it's turned. Next, we're going to work on the points at the hem. So there's 8 points altogether, one on each panel of the body. The way the points are created is by folding the panel on itself and lining up the hem, lining up like the bottom of the hem, and making sure that the fold of where you folded the panel on itself hits in the corner of the little V that you left unserged. And then I just pin it in place, and I'm going to sew the corner starting at the fold, going parallel to my unserged V. So this is what it looks like just before I start sewing. You see my needle starts on the fold, and it's going to go down to the hem, to where the serged edge is, the bottom of the hem. And here's a closer look of me doing one of the corners. Next, we're going to trim the seam allowance on each of those corners so that when you turn it, it lays nice and smooth and flat. And this is what it looks like. It creates like a little triangle. And when you turn, the corner is very nice and smooth. Now we're going to attach our sleeves to the body following the notches. So 2 notches go towards the back and 1 notch goes towards the front, and the notches line up with the princess seam lines. So just like before with the princess lines, we're sewing 2 curves together, so there is some ease and difference in length, and the most important thing is to follow the notches. So the 2 notches and the 1 notch that line up with the princess seams, as well as the notch that lines up with the underarm seam and the shoulder seam, and the rest of the time you're going to be easing the fabric to make sure that they fit together between those notches. Next, we're going to press up our hem so that it is easier when we do the top stitch on it. We do this by turning all the corners and following the hem notches on each of the panels and kind of using those as a guide to turn the hem and press it. Just as I'm doing here. I'm doing 1 panel at a time, kind of from corner to corner until I reach my plackets on either end. We will also press our button placket at this time, as well as our we will also press our button placket at this time. And we're also going to do we're going to press our sleeve seams, and I'm using a seam roll here to get the seam of the sleeve really nice and flat before I steam it. Moving on, we're going to top stitch the hem of our cardigan. So the hem follows all the points that are on each panel. It starts at the placket. It's a 3/4 inch top stitch for the hem. It starts at the placket. You can go over the placket if you like. I prefer the look of it when it's not going over the placket. So I start there on my placket, and I use my machine guide to do 3/4 inch top stitch, and I feel each corner, there's a little seam. You can feel the seam of the corner and guide your needle into that seam, and when you hit that seam underneath, that's when you would turn the corner. If after you've turned the cardigan your next seam is not lining up with the 3/4, you can turn it back, and so pivot it back and either add an extra stitch, or you might need to take it out. If you've gone too far, you might need to take it out and start all over again. So this is what my hem looks like. This is before I've pressed the hem. And now I'm going to go back to my ironing board and just press that hem all the way around. I press it on the inside so I don't have to worry about burning the fabric. And I press it really nice so that the corners are really flat and it's really nice and even all the way around. Now that our cardigan is all put together, we're going to move on to adding buttons and buttonholes. With your pattern, there's a paper buttonhole guide that's included. Once you've cut out the guide that's corresponding to the size you're using, you'll line up the placket with where it says hem, so the hem of the placket and the hem on the paper go together, and you're going to mark whichever part you need to. I mean, for my machine, the buttonhole starts at the bottom, so I'll be marking the bottom of the buttonhole. Or if your machine starts at the top of the buttonhole, then you would mark the top of the buttonhole, or if it starts in the middle, like where that X is, that's where the button is. If your machine starts in the middle, that's where you would mark. So mark whatever is best for you and corresponds with the way your machine does the buttonholes. Once I've marked all my buttonholes, I'm going to put them all in using my machine, This is the way my machine does them. It's really quick and easy. I'm using the Brother CS6000i machine I got on Amazon. Once I've sewn all my buttonholes, I'm going to just cut them open. I like to start by folding the placket on the buttonhole on itself and just cutting a tiny hole, snipping a tiny hole with my scissors, and then flattening out the buttonhole and cutting the rest of it open. And lastly, I'm going to use my buttonholes or my paper buttonhole guide and place the buttons on the other side of the placket. Now your cardigan is complete. Thank you for joining me and for purchasing Tetiana K patterns. I'd love to see what you create. Please connect and share with me on Instagram at Tetiana K patterns. Complete sewing kits, including fabric and notions that I used in this video today, are available on my Etsy shop as well. Please hit like and subscribe for more updates on YouTube and new videos as they come out. Thank you again.